Welcome to The Haunted Beard, everybody. My name is Jake. Thank you for joining me. So if you have been following along, I have been making my way through George A. Romero's zombie movies, and today I'm talking about Diary of the Dead.
What's hurt?
It's all burned up.
The problem doesn't seem to be that people are waking up dead. The dead people are waking up.
And George A. Romero had a little bit different of an approach here with this film as he went to the found footage style. And this film opens up with a handful of film students who happen to be filming their very own zombie horror movie. Only through an unfortunate turn of events, they find themselves right at the start of the zombie apocalypse and are being chased by real-life zombies. And so at that point, the filmmaker and director decides to kind of shift gears and change his project in what turns into a documentary documenting the zombie apocalypse. And like with all of these, this was a first-time watch for me, and I went into this one having a little bit of elevated hopes and expectations. I am a bit of a sucker for found footage movies, one of my more favorite horror subgenres, and so being a fan of this franchise, I was very interested and curious to see what Romero was going to do with this film, being that it was a found footage. And while there were some aspects of the film that I enjoyed and thought worked pretty well, overall, the film was a bit of a disappointment for me and left some things to be desired, unfortunately. Now, I do like the found footage setup here. I like that it just kind of gives this film a completely different and unique feel compared to the rest of the movies, even though I think really all of them up until this point stand out as its own unique thing, and this is just another way that Romero kind of introduces something new and creative into this franchise. And so I like this approach. I like the authentic kind of raw feel of the found footage here. I thought that was a good idea, but ultimately how he uses the found footage setup and the story he tries to tell, I was a little bit, like I said, disappointed with. What he does here is he really just goes back to the very beginning. All the way back to 1968, if you will, with the original Night of the Living Dead, as that film takes place on day one of the zombie apocalypse, and here we are again now in 2007, but it's really just kind of continuing that same timeline. It's going back to day one of the zombie apocalypse, and we are now following these characters around as they are, all of them really just trying to get back home and find some sort of safety while, trying to survive. And while I can appreciate him kind of going back to the beginning and giving us a bit of a different take and kind of angle on this sort of story, I really wish he would have just continued the same storyline trajectory that the previous film, Land of the Dead, ended with. I really liked what Romero started doing there, where you got with Day of the Dead and then all the way into Land of the Dead, where he was having these evolving zombies as they were slowly and gradually becoming more intelligent and more kind of self-aware, being able to use things like tools and weapons. And I would have liked to have seen that storyline continue. The way he ended Land of the Dead, I was anticipating this follow-up and hoping he was just going to kind of continue that same storyline with those evolving zombies, but instead he jumps us all the way back to the beginning and gives us Diary of the Dead. One of the biggest problems people have with found footage films is usually in regards to the performances and the characters, and unfortunately Diary of the Dead kind of has some of those same issues, as I found the characters to be pretty bland and uninspired, and I also found the performances to be not great. Some of the performances are fine and adequate, but the performance from really like the main character, Deborah, is again not great. I found a handful of sequences where her dialogue just felt kind of clunky and awkward and just not very believable. And in regards to the characters, like I said, they're just kind of bland. Nobody really has much of a personality. There's not much depth. There's not much fleshing out of any of the characters, so you don't really get to know any of them. And nobody has anything kind of interesting. There's no sort of, personality really to any of them. They all just kind of exist and are just sort of there. One of the comments that I made about one of the previous films in this franchise is I like how Romero has made each film feel individual and unique in how the stories are more than just kind of a basic zombie survival story. Well, unfortunately, Diary of the Dead kind of comes across as just a very kind of stripped down, basic zombie survival story. There's not a whole lot more going on here. It's just a handful of characters who are trying to survive, and they drive back to one of their homes as she is trying to be reunited with her family, only finds out it's Deborah's family, that her family has all turned into zombies, and so they drive and go to the next house, which is one of their friends' house. And so I just wish we would have gotten more to the story. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. The zombie apocalypse is happening. Let's do whatever we can to survive. Whereas the other films in this franchise have added just different elements in different kind of complexities that make the stories feel more kind of involved and more interesting and engaging. And this one I just felt was pretty bland and pretty basic. And because of that, I honestly got a little bit bored with this film. It only clocks in at like 95 minutes, and it was about the hour 15 mark. I was kind of like, all right, it kind of just ran out of steam for me, and I just got a little bit bored with it. And I also found the ending to be pretty anticlimactic and also a little disappointing, as eventually what happens is a handful of our main cast of characters, they all meet up with one of their friends who happens to live in this big kind of mansion, and it happens to have a panic room in there. And what ends up happening is one of the main characters, Jason, who's the guy filming all of this, the one behind the camera, he ends up getting killed. And so there's just a few characters left. They lock themselves in this panic room. And then his girlfriend kind of just gives a little bit of voiceover commentary at the end, as some of her voiceover sprinkled throughout the film. And then she's like, yeah, this is the last footage that Jason ever shot. And then the film just kind of ends. And it's like, okay, I guess that's it then. And it just felt kind of anticlimactic and just didn't really have much impact. Now, I do want to speak on some of the commentary that the film gets into, because I do think that if there is something worthwhile in this film, it has to do with like what a lot of these movies do, in that George Romero is saying something in these movies, and he's kind of holding up a mirror to society and things like that. And he does that here with Diary of the Dead, which I appreciated, and I thought the commentary was interesting. I just wish it would have been packaged in a more interesting and engaging movie overall. But what he does here is he looks at kind of the ethics of filming stuff. And in the day and age, now this is 2007, where the internet is exploding, and there's news outlets and sources from all over the place. It's not just a few main news stations. Now you've got blogs and online stuff. It's like, how do we find truth? How do we discern truth anymore? And so it kind of looks at the complexity of truth, and it also kind of looks at some of the ethics behind filming and documenting events, as this character of Jason is basically committed to just being this sort of fly on the wall, objective observer, and not getting involved in really any of the action. There's zombies attacking his friends, and he's just sitting there filming. And so it kind of looks at, is that ethical? What's the difference between sort of documenting something and just straight up exploiting, exploitation versus documentary kind of thing? The film also kind of makes an interesting comparison where this character has a gun and he kills one of the zombies, and he's like, take this thing away from me. It's too easy to use. And then like 2 minutes later, the same thing happens with a video camera, and the guy's like, take this thing away from me. It's too easy to use. And so just kind of comparing the dangers of filming stuff and documenting stuff and looking at the camera as a weapon. And so there's some interesting things here, and I like what Romero does with that. I just wish, again, it would have been packaged within a better and more interesting movie overall. So yeah, like I said, this one was a bit of a disappointment for me. I really wanted to like it. I liked the found footage approach. I liked some of the commentary he was getting at, but a lot of it here, it just kind of feels bland. I didn't really engage with any of the characters, and I found the story to be kind of lackluster. So I'm going to go 5 out of 10 for Diary of the Dead overall. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Hit me up down below. Let me know your thoughts. Would be very curious to hear from you guys. Up next is the final film in this series, Survival of the Dead. So we'll be reviewing that one soon, and then I'm going to do a ranking video ranking all of the 8 movies that I've reviewed in this franchise. So That's all I got for you today, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Greatly appreciate it. If you got anything out of this video, go ahead and do me a favor and do not click that subscribe button unless you want to be haunted by the beard.